In a city of 25 million secrets, Riley Amari had learned to vanish amid the neon crowds. It was a rhythm she knew by heart. The relentless thrum of isolation that echoed in her chest, syncing with the buzz of subway announcements at dawn and the chatter of students dismissing her lessons by dusk. One job, 6 days a week, with scarcely enough moments between classes to breathe, let alone belong. At 26, Riley had perfected the dance of endurance, nodding politely when needed, scribbling Korean phrases in her notebook during frantic bus rides, and convincing herself the sharp pang in her soul was just homesickness and nothing deeper. Seoul had beckoned her everything when she first arrived from Atlanta 9 months ago. Her father's voice echoing in her ear, both of them clutching passports brimming with ambition, and her late grandmother's old tales of resilience. What began as casual language apps turned into a hurried degree in education before visas forced her overseas. The city had delivered beauty laced with brutality instead. The kind that devoured outsiders whole and left only the echoes of unspoken dreams. She'd come to teach English as a bridge across cultures, to honor the wanderlust her grandmother had whispered during family gatherings in Ghanaian-infused Atlanta homes. Each story a quiet defiance against the ordinary life that had trapped her kin. Instead, Riley found herself correcting pronunciations and grading papers on kimchi traditions. Her passion reduced to a timetable measured in bells per period and stares that never quite saw her. Her savings were gone 2 months in. The culture shock lingered, a shadow that shadowed every one spent. Tonight, like most nights, Riley stood in the dim glow of a backstreet haven, watching the rain-slicked alleys with weary eyes. The place was one of those hidden spots that dotted Seoul's underbelly. All velvet shadows, flickering candles, and scents that blended American comfort with Korean edge in ways that somehow pierced. Brewed tea with southern sweet notes, spiced patties wrapped in banchan that the owner, a diaspora Korean with roots in global streets, crafted as a nod to the city's hidden migrants. It smelled like memory and displacement all at once. A fragrance that should have soothed Riley, but instead echoed everything she'd sacrificed and everyone she could never fully become. She just finished wiping a spilled drop for a corner patron when the door slid open, letting in a swirl of storm-soaked air, and a man who seemed to drag the night's thunder in his wake without faltering. Riley noticed him immediately, though she forced her gaze away. Everyone noticed him. It wasn't just his stature. Though towering with a lean, predatory grace, he owned the space. Or the way his charcoal suit clung to him like it was forged for his form alone. It was the way he glided through the room as if every shadow rearranged itself to his command. As if the air itself thickened in deference to his path. Lord Kang. She didn't know his name yet, but she would etch it into her fears soon enough. Along with all the whispers that clung to it, like curses no one dared voice aloud. He settled at the central table, the one unspokenly claimed by those who never waited because the world had long ago learned to foresee their whims. His jet-black hair was slicked back severely, revealing a neck etched with ink that peaked like forbidden vows, styled in that calculated perfection that likely demanded more effort than Riley invested in her entire weary facade in a month. A subtle silver ring glinted under the low lights at his finger, visible where his shirt parted just enough to hint he'd never bowed to anyone's rules but his own. His hands, resting with coiled stillness, bore tattoos that snaked over veins and knuckles like vows carved in shadow. Not the reckless marks of rebellion, but the intentional scars of a man who knew some choices etched deeper than skin and embraced them relentlessly. Riley felt something ignite in her core. A treacherous spark of intrigue she swiftly smothered under layers of caution. Men like that were ruin. She'd glimpsed enough in her months abroad to spot the breed. Too magnetic, too controlled, too used to claiming whatever caught their eye without ever needing to demand. The kind of man who likely saw dominance as destiny, and a woman's wariness as mere prelude to surrender. She approached his spot with her composed teacher smile locked in place. The one that was polite enough to avoid offense, but guarded enough to deflect intrusion. "Welcome," she murmured in halting Korean. "What can I get for you tonight?" He looked up from his shadowed repose. And Riley found herself pinned by the most piercing stare she'd faced in years. His eyes were storm dark, not soft hazel but a void black in the club's hazy glow, and they dissected her with a force that felt tangible. Not predatory in the crude sense. She could have deflected that. This was sharper. This was the gaze of someone who pierced the accent and the fatigue. Someone who glimpsed the loneliness she buried so deeply. "Green tea," he replied in flawless English, voice low and laced with amusement. "Hot. And take your time, I'm enjoying the view." Of course, he would switch languages effortlessly. Of course, he would see right through her like she was already his to unravel. Riley jotted it down without reaction, her face a mask of calm. He leaned back, attention shifting with the lazy confidence of someone who'd never questioned his impact. Dismissing her with the effortless flick of a man whose indifference cut like hidden blades, Riley turned away, insisting to herself the flush on her skin was annoyance and nothing else. She tended to the room's murmurs throughout the evening, but stayed acutely aware of him. Every pour of tea, every forced smile at a patron's joke, every glance toward the corner where he sat like a king on an invisible throne, it all circled back to that storm-dark gaze. He never looked up again, not once, yet she felt him cataloging her movements the way a predator tracks a scent on the wind. By the time the club dimmed its lights and the rain outside thinned to a drizzle, Riley's hands trembled as she gathered her notebook and slipped out into the night. Her wallet, damn it, she must have dropped it when the tea spilled. Gone, along with her Metro card, her last few thousand won, and the fragile illusion that she could brush against danger and walk away untouched. Sleep came in fractured pieces, haunted by ink curling like serpents and a voice that teased in perfect English. She woke to the insistent buzz of her intercom at dawn, the Seoul skyline still bruised purple beyond her thin curtains. Two men stood at her door, immaculate in black suits that screamed money and menace. They filled the narrow hallway of her aging apartment building like shadows poured into fabric. The taller one held her wallet out with gloved fingers, as if it were evidence. "Miss Amari," he said in clipped Korean, bowing just enough to mock politeness. "You dropped this." Riley's heart stuttered. She took it, fingers brushing leather that suddenly felt tainted. Tucked inside was an embossed envelope, heavy cream stock sealed with crimson wax. A tiger emblem pressed into it, Biko. White tiger. "And this," the second man added, extending it. "From Lord Kang. He expects you at 11. They didn't wait for a reply. Just turned and descended the stairs, their footsteps echoing like gunshots in the quiet morning. She should have thrown the envelope away. Should have packed her single suitcase and caught the next train to Incheon Airport, visa be damned. Instead, Riley showered in water that never quite got hot, dressed in her least wrinkled blouse, and boarded the subway with the envelope burning a hole in her bag. The address led to a glass tower in Gangnam, the kind of building that reflected the city's chaos back at itself 1,000 times over. Security waved her through without a word, as if her name had been whispered ahead of her arrival. The elevator shot upward in silence, depositing her on the 47th floor where a receptionist with a smile sharp as glass led her down a corridor lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her entire life's earnings. Lord Kang waited in an office that overlooked Seoul like a god surveying his domain. He stood by the window, back to her, hands clasped behind him. The same charcoal suit, or one identical, tailored perfection that made her feel rumpled and small. Tattoos peeked from his collar as he turned, that slow, deliberate movement reminding her of a blade being unsheathed. "Miss Amari." His English wrapped around her name like smoke. "Sit." She obeyed, perching on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He didn't. Just watched her with those void black eyes, amusement flickering at the corners of his mouth. "You left something behind last night," he said, gesturing to a side table where her spilled tea had been recreated, porcelain cup, steaming liquid, exact same placement. A joke, or a threat? With him, the line blurred. "My wallet." "Returned." He waved a dismissive hand. "Consider it a courtesy. You dropped more than leather in my club. You dropped your guard. Brave. Or foolish." Riley's chin lifted. "I didn't mean to intrude. It was a mistake." Mistakes have consequences in my world. Kang moved closer, each step measured. He placed a folder on the desk between them, thick, official-looking documents stamped with seals she didn't recognize. But some mistakes open doors. He sat finally, leaning back with the lazy confidence of a man who owned gravity itself. Your teaching program. The one that brought you to Seoul. Funded by the Hanseong Cultural Exchange Foundation, correct? Riley nodded slowly, unease pooling in her stomach. Hanseong is mine. One of my investments. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Your apartment in Mapogu? Paid through a subsidiary. Your work visa. Expedited by my people. Even the salary that keeps you in instant noodles and Subway tokens. My money, Riley. Every one. The room tilted. She gripped the chair arms, knuckles paling. That's not possible. I applied through the university. Universities need donors. Kang opened the folder, sliding photographs across the desk. Her signature on forms, bank transfers, even a photo of her asleep on the subway, head against the window. Surveillance. You've been living on my dime for 9 months. Comfortable. Safe. Invisible. Her breath came shallow. Why? Because I collect useful things. He tapped the folder. Languages. Loyalties. Debts. Leaning forward, his voice dropped to that dangerous register that had haunted her dreams. You owe me, Riley Amari. Now, you'll work for me. The words landed like chains. She should have screamed. Should have run. Instead, she heard herself ask, doing what? Translating. He produced a contract, English and Korean side by side, clauses that made her skin crawl. My import business deals with international partners. You speak the language of outsiders. You'll make sure nothing is lost in translation. The pay was obscene. Enough to clear her remaining student loans back home, send money to her father, maybe even breathe without counting coins. Enough to trap her. I don't have a choice, do I? Kang's grin was slow, deliberate, the same one from the club that promised ruin. There's always a choice. But only one keeps you breathing freely. She signed. The pen felt like surrender. 3 days later, Riley sat in a secure office 2 floors below Kang's, surrounded by stacks of documents that smelled of fresh ink and old blood. At first glance, they looked legitimate. Shipping manifests for electronics, luxury goods, agricultural equipment. But the more she translated, the more the patterns emerged. Quantities that didn't match weights. Ports that existed only on paper. Phrases buried in Korean legalese that her fluent eye caught like tripwires. White Tiger's share, Jeju ghost shipment, clean through Busan by moonless night. These weren't contracts. They were ledgers. Money laundering routes disguised as trade deals. Weapon shipments hidden in appliance crates. Names she recognized from dark web whispers, syndicates in Busan, triads in Shanghai, cartels reaching fingers into Seoul's veins. Fear became fascination as the days blurred. Kang's world operated with ruthless efficiency, no wasted words, no mercy for weakness, loyalty purchased in blood and fear. His men moved like extensions of his will, speaking in codes she'd begun to decipher without trying. Yet beneath the cold precision, she glimpsed fractures. The way he paused over certain files, old ones mentioning Jeju, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. The haunted flicker in his eyes when a subordinate mentioned the old man's ways. Once, catching her watching him through the glass partition, he didn't look away. Just held her gaze with something raw beneath the monster mask. A man shaped by violence but haunted by conscience. Riley told herself it was professional curiosity. Told herself the flutter in her chest when he summoned her personally was just survival instinct. But debts had a way of deepening in Seoul's shadows. And Lord Kang collected more than money. He collected pieces of souls. Riley repeated it like a warning as the weeks dissolved into a haze of fluorescent lights and encrypted files. The secure office became her cage, glass walls that let her see the comings and goings of Kang's men, but never quite let her leave. She translated sunrise to sunset, fingers cramping over keyboards, eyes burning from screens that never dimmed. The money hit her account in clean, untraceable sums. Enough to send her father a transfer labeled consulting fees. Enough to buy silence from the part of her that screamed to run. But running was a fantasy now. Every document she touched tied her tighter to the White Tiger's empire. It started with a sealed file. Red wax, same tiger emblem, delivered personally by Kang's shadow. Seo Jae-min, the lieutenant whose smile never reached his eyes. Priority, he'd said, voice flat. Lord Kang wants this by tomorrow. Riley broke the seal after midnight, when the building emptied and Seoul's lights glittered below like scattered diamonds over black water. The folder was old, paper yellowed at the edges, ink faded but deliberate. Operation Jeju, stamped across the top in Hangul that made her stomach drop. She translated slowly, each line heavier than the last. April 3, 1948. Jeju Island. Uprising crushed. Rival syndicate, the Blue Dragon clan, wiped out in a single night. Homes burned. Bodies weighted and sunk in the harbor. A consolidation of power orchestrated by Kang Min-ho, the man whose blood ran in the veins of the monster who now owned her days. But one detail stopped her breath. A child. 8 years old. Missing. Presumed taken by the tide, or hidden. The only survivor of the purge. No name. Just a grainy photograph clipped to the report. A boy with Kang's cheekbones, standing beside a woman whose face had been burned away by time and fire. Her hands shook as she closed the folder. Dawn bled through the blinds before she moved again. She waited until he summoned her, always on his schedule, never hers. That evening, the elevator took her to the penthouse office she'd only glimpsed before. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Han River like a vein of molten gold. Kang stood at the bar, pouring something dark into crystal. No suit jacket tonight, just the white shirt, sleeves rolled high enough to reveal the full map of his tattoos. Serpents coiling into tigers, devouring their own tails. You found it, he said without turning. Not a question. Riley's voice cracked anyway. Operation Jeju. Your father. He faced her then, glass in hand, expression unreadable. My father was efficient. The Blue Dragons challenged our routes. He ended the challenge. Ended? She stepped closer, the folder clutched like a weapon. He slaughtered an entire family. Women. Children. There was a boy. Kang's jaw flexed. The air thickened, charged like the moment before thunder. She expected rage. Denial. Violence. Instead, he laughed, low, bitter, the sound of glass grinding underfoot. You think I hide from ghosts, Riley? He set the glass down untouched. That file isn't buried. It's displayed. A reminder. Of what? Her voice rose despite herself. That you're just like him? He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping close enough that she smelled cedar and gun oil on his skin. Close enough to see the faint scar slicing through his left eyebrow, imperfection the city's myths never mentioned. My father was a monster, he said quietly, each word carved. I just learned to speak his language. The confession hung between them, raw as an open wound. Riley searched his face for triumph, for pride. Found none. Only exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes, the kind that no amount of power erased. He didn't look away. Didn't flinch. For the first time, the mask slipped, not shattered, but cracked enough to glimpse the man beneath. Not the silent storm. Not the white tiger. Just a son who'd inherited hell and built a throne from its ashes. You kept the boy's picture, she whispered. Kang's gaze flickered, something ancient and aching. Some debts can't be paid. Only carried. He turned back to the window, shoulders rigid beneath the ink. The world sees ruthlessness and calls it strength. They don't see the nights I hear waves crashing on Jeju shores that aren't there. Don't see the way my hands shake when I sign orders that sound too much like his. Riley's throat closed. She should hate him. Should use this truth as a blade to cut herself free. Instead, she stepped beside him, the city sprawling below like a battlefield of lights. "You're not him," she said. The word surprised them both. Kang's reflection met hers in the glass. "Aren't I?" His voice dropped to a murmur. "Every empire is built on graves, Riley. Mine just has better lighting." Silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. She saw it then, the fracture. Ruthlessness wasn't pride for him. It was armor. Survival forged in fire and blood, and a child's screams echoing across decades. For the first time, Riley saw him not as the monster others feared, but as a man who'd become his father's shadow just to keep the darkness from swallowing him whole. She warned herself not to care. Caring was a luxury that got people disappeared in Kang's world. Caring was the first step toward a grave with no name. But the heart, she learned, spoke a language older than fear. And hers had already started translating his pain into something dangerously close to understanding. Kang finally moved, pouring a second glass. He held it out, not an order, but an offering. "Drink," he said. "Ghosts taste better with company." Riley took it. Their fingers brushed, electric, inevitable. Outside, Seoul kept spinning its neon lies. Inside, two shadows stood at the edge of something neither had named yet. Caring, she realized as the burn slid down her throat, was already a dangerous luxury. And she was bankrupt. The realization settled over Riley like a second skin. Inescapable, intimate, and far too comfortable. She drank with him that night, the burn of whiskey chasing ghosts neither of them named. When the glass was empty, Kang didn't touch her. Just watched her leave with eyes that followed long after the elevator doors closed. The next morning, the sealed files kept coming, but now they arrived with a single black card tucked inside, his private number, handwritten. No words. Just trust, handed over like a loaded gun. Days bled into weeks. Riley stopped counting the one in her account and started counting the silences in Kang's voice. She learned to read more than Hangul, learned the weight of a pause when a rival's name appeared in a ledger, the flicker of a muscle when a shipment route skirted Jeju waters. She translated subtext, the way delayed delivery meant someone was skimming, how weather complications masked a raid. Kang began pulling her into meetings, her chair placed not behind him like staff, but beside him like counsel. His men noticed. Co Jae-min noticed most of all. The Korean lieutenant's smile grew thinner each time Riley spoke, his eyes lingering on her like she was a glitch in the system. But Kang waved off the tension with a flick of tattooed fingers. "She sees what others miss," he said once, and the room bowed to it. Trust tasted like danger and honey. It was past 2 a.m. when the pattern finally clawed its way into focus. Riley sat alone in the secure office, surrounded by towers of manifests destined for a shell company in Vladivostok. The phrases were buried deep, innocent trade jargon on the surface, but repeating like a heartbeat. The white tiger fades with the dawn. The storm loses its voice before the moon sets. Silent blades cut deepest at the harbor's edge. She cross-referenced dates, ports, personnel logs. Every instance aligned with convoys Jae-min had personally approved. Every route he'd rerouted, for efficiency. Every payment that vanished into accounts traced back to a foreign syndicate sniffing at Seoul's borders. Betrayal, written in the language she now spoke fluently. Her hands didn't shake this time. They moved with purpose, printing, highlighting, building a timeline that ended in blood if Kang didn't listen. She took the elevator to the penthouse without calling ahead. Protocol be damned. Kang was at his desk, shirt unbuttoned, hair disheveled in a way that made him look almost human. A half-empty bottle of something expensive sat beside maps of Busan's docks. He looked up, surprise softening into something warmer when he saw her. "You should be asleep," he murmured. "I found something." Riley spread the pages across his desk like evidence in a trial. "It's Jae-min. He's selling you out. These codes, they're warnings, but they're also instructions. The next convoy leaves tomorrow night. If you don't stop it." Kang scanned the documents, his expression shifting from skepticism to stone. When he reached the final page, Jaemin's signature beside a transfer timestamped 3 hours ago, his knuckles whitened. "Jae-min saved my life," he said finally, voice low. "Took a bullet meant for me in Macau. Don't mistake loyalty for ambition, Riley. He's playing both sides." She leaned over the desk, close enough to see the pulse in his throat. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to survive." For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Kang exhaled, slow and deliberate. "I'll handle it." He dismissed her with a nod that felt like a wall slamming down. Riley left with dread coiled tight in her gut, the kind that whispered she just signed death warrants anyway. The call came at 4:17 a.m. She was pacing her apartment in one of Kang's borrowed shirts, silk, black, smelling of him, when the private line rang. Unknown number. His voice, ragged and wet. "Riley." One word, and her world tilted. Busan Expressway. Ambush. Jae-min, a cough, thick with blood. "You were right." Then the line went dead. She was in the car they sent before the sun rose, speeding south through tunnels that blurred like tears. The hospital reeked of antiseptic and gunpowder residue. Kang's men filled the corridors, some bandaged, most broken. They parted for her without question now. He looked small in the bed. Tubes snaked into veins, monitors beeping a frantic rhythm. Bandages wrapped his torso, crimson blooming through white. His face was swollen, lips split, but those storm-dark eyes found her the moment she entered. "Thought you'd run," he rasped. Traffic was light. She pulled the chair close, voice steadier than her hands. Doctors had pumped him full of painkillers, but he fought the haze when she sat. Riley opened the tablet a nurse handed her, his reports, classified casualty lists. Names of men who died because she hadn't decoded faster. She began reading aloud in Korean, soft and deliberate. Every wound translated into clinical terms, every loss quantified. When she reached the part about shrapnel tearing through his lung, her voice cracked. "Keep going," he whispered. "I need to hear it in your voice." So she did. Translated his pain back to him, word for word, until the monitors slowed and his breathing evened. Until the ruthless silent storm looked at her like she was the only anchor in a sea of red. "You saved what's left of me," he said when she finished. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with surprising strength. "Jae-min's gone. Took 3 bullets to confess. Foreign syndicate promised him my throne." Riley's throat closed. "How many dead?" 7. His grip tightened. 7 because I didn't listen soon enough. Silence stretched, heavy with ghosts newer than Jeju's. She should pull away. Should remind herself he was still a monster, still the man who'd bought her life in installments. Instead, she leaned forward, forehead resting against their joined hands. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "Don't be." Kang's thumb traced her knuckles, a touch so gentle it fractured something inside her. "You gave me truth. No one else dared." The heart monitor beeped steady now. Outside, dawn crept over Busan's scarred horizon. That moment changed everything between them. Not debt. Not translation. Something deeper, coated in blood and whispered warnings and the fragile space where monsters learn to trust. Riley stayed until visiting hours ended, reading reports until her voice gave out. When the nurses finally forced her to leave, Kang was asleep, face slack, tattoos stark against hospital white. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, tasting salt and gunpowder. Instincts, she realized as she walked into the morning light, weren't the only things that refused to quiet down anymore. Her heart had joined the chorus. And it was screaming his name. The hospital discharged him 3 days later, against every doctor's protest. Kang walked out under his own power, bandages hidden beneath a fresh charcoal suit. Moving like pain was just another language he refused to speak. Riley waited in the corridor, forbidden from his room after that first night but unable to leave the building. When he saw her, something shifted in his eyes, relief, raw and unguarded. "You're coming with me," he said. No question. No room for argument. "For my safety," she echoed later, in the bulletproof SUV slicing through Busan's dawn traffic back to Seoul. Kang's hand rested on her knee, possessive and steady. Exactly. His tone suggested otherwise. Suggested ownership. Suggested the line they'd crossed in that sterile room wasn't temporary. He installed her in the penthouse above the office, his private floor, untouched by staff or subordinates. A cage of marble and glass with a view that swallowed the city whole. "Close enough to protect," he said. "Close enough to consume." The lessons began immediately. Silence as currency, how a pause before answering a question could make a man sweat blood. How refusing to blink during a stare-down bought more loyalty than any bribe. Respect measured in absences, who wasn't invited to the table, whose calls went unanswered until they begged. Kang taught with his body as much as words. In underground warehouses reeking of salt and diesel, he showed her how a slight tilt of the head signaled mercy, how a finger tapped once on a holster meant end of discussion. He made her practice. Reading the micro-tremor in a trader's lip, the way fear dilated pupils differently than anger. "You see hesitation," he murmured during one session, his breath warm against her ear as they watched a shipment unload. "You exploit it. Mercy is a blade that cuts both ways." Riley learned fast. Learned to read deceit in the way a guard's eyes flick to exits that shouldn't matter. Learned fear in the hitch of breath when Kang's name was spoken. She stood at his side in meetings now, no longer translating words but intentions. His men deferred to her glances, waited for her subtle nods before speaking. And Kang began to unlearn. It started small. A deal he walked away from because the rival's son looked too much like the Jeju ghost. An underling he spared after a betrayal that should have ended in the harbor. Conscience is weakness, he'd always said. Now, when she caught him staring at old scars in the mirror, he didn't deny the crack she'd widened. He touched her more. Not possession, reverence. Fingers tracing her wrist like she was scripture. Eyes lingering on her mouth when she decoded a threat faster than his best men. The night it broke was after Incheon. Rivals from the north, remnants of a syndicate Jae-min had courted, demanded a sit-down. Neutral ground, they said. Kang went with 6 men and came back with 3. The penthouse elevator opened to the scent of blood and gunpowder clinging to him like cologne. Riley waited in the dim living room, heart in her throat. He'd texted once, "Stay inside," nothing since. He staggered in, shirt torn and soaked crimson at the side. Knife wound, deep but not fatal. His face was a mask of controlled fury, but his eyes, God, his eyes were wild. "You're hurt." She was moving before thinking, grabbing the medical kit his staff kept stocked. Kang sank onto the leather sofa, head back, throat exposed. Tattoos stark against paling skin. "Should have run when I told you to," he rasped. "Weeks ago. Before Busan. Before this." Riley knelt between his legs, cutting away fabric with shaking hands. The gash ran from ribs to hip, ugly, but cleanable. She worked in silence, antiseptic sting, needle threading skin, each stitch pulling him together while unraveling her. "And leave you bleeding alone?" She didn't look up. Couldn't. Not happening. His laugh was pained, broken glass. "You don't know what kind of man I am." Needle paused. She met his gaze then, storm dark eyes fractured with something she'd never seen in them before. Not rage. Not control. Fear. I do, she whispered. Thread pulled tight, sealing flesh and fate. That's why I stayed. The air charged. Electric. Inevitable. Kang's hand rose, slow, like approaching a wild thing, cupping her cheek with blood-stained fingers. His thumb traced her lower lip, reverent and ruined. You terrify me, he confessed, voice raw. Death I've faced 1,000 times. But you. His forehead dropped to hers, breath mingling. You make me want things I buried with my father. Things that get people killed. Riley's hands settled on his thighs, feeling the tremor he couldn't hide. Then let me be the thing that keeps you alive. The kiss wasn't gentle. Wasn't soft. It was teeth and desperation, blood and whiskey, two people who'd learned power's language finally speaking in touch. He tasted like violence held at bay, like the moment before thunder when the world holds its breath. She straddled him carefully, mindful of wounds, but he pulled her closer, needing the pain, needing proof this was real. His hands mapped her like territory he'd died defending. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling just enough to elicit that low growl that lived in her dreams now. When they broke apart, gasping, his eyes weren't afraid anymore. They were alive. Teach me, he murmured against her throat. Teach me how to be the man who deserves this. Riley smiled, small, fierce, unbreakable. Lesson 1, she said, guiding his hand to her heart. Cruelty without conscience is just noise. Start listening to the quiet parts. Kang closed his eyes, pressing his palm flat like he could absorb her mercy through skin. For the first time, the silent storm wasn't silent. He was listening. Their chemistry had crossed the line between danger and intimacy, and neither looked back. In the language of power, Riley realized, love wasn't weakness. It was the sharpest blade of all. And she'd just handed him the hilt. Kang held it carefully at first, testing the weight of mercy like a blade he'd never been taught to wield. He let her sleep in his bed without claiming more than space. Let her correct him in private when a punishment veered toward his father's cruelty. Let her trace the Jeju scar on his chest while he whispered names of the dead like prayers. Power still thrummed through his veins, but now it beat in time with something softer. Something that terrified them both. The invitation arrived on heavy cardstock, gold-embossed lies about charity and unity. Hanul Tower Charity Gala. Seoul's elite pretending their money was clean while toasting over blood-stained ledgers. Kang had to attend. Absence was weakness, and weakness was death. You'll come as my translator, he said, fingers lingering on her collarbone as he fastened the emerald necklace that matched her gown. Eyes open. Mouth shut unless I say. Riley nodded, the weight of diamonds cool against her throat. She'd worn borrowed silk before, but never armor disguised as elegance. Hanul Tower pierced the night sky like a blade of glass and light. The gala spilled across the top 3 floors, crystal chandeliers dripping wealth, string quartets drowning whispers, champagne flowing like the Han River outside. Kang moved through it all like he owned gravity. Heads bowed. Smiles sharpened. Riley stayed half a step behind, scanning faces she now knew by ledger and legend. Foreign investors clustered near the auction podium. Pale men in bespoke tuxedos, accents thick with Russian winters and American greed. Jaemin's remnants. She felt it before she heard it. She was fetching Kang a drink, playing the part, when the phrases drifted past in perfect Korean, masked as small talk. The White Tiger's final fade begins at midnight. Storm silenced by crystal rain. Her blood turned to ice. The same codes she'd decoded months ago. The ones Kang had dismissed as paranoia after Busan. Jaemin wasn't dead. Or if he was, his betrayal had metastasized. Riley's champagne flute trembled. She set it down before it shattered and wove through the crowd, heart slamming against ribs. Kang stood near the balcony, laughing at something a minister said, laughing, the sound foreign and precious and about to be stolen. She reached him, fingers digging into his sleeve. "They're coming for you." The words rushed out in Korean first, then English, frantic. "Now. Jaemin's people. The codes." His face went lethal calm. Hand already sliding inside his jacket for the piece strapped beneath tuxedo silk. Too late. The first shot cracked like thunder trapped in glass. Then another. Chandeliers exploded in diamond rain. Screams ricocheted off marble as bodies dropped, security, guests, innocents who'd never signed up for this war. Kang moved faster than thought. Shoved her behind a pillar, body covering hers like a shield. "Stay down." A bullet meant for her heart tore through his shoulder instead. Hot blood sprayed her cheek. He didn't flinch. Just drew his own weapon, returning fire with the precision of a man who'd been born holding death. Chaos swallowed the room. Glass walls shattered outward, wind howling in like judgment. Riley's ears rang. Her hands found the earpiece he'd dropped, tiny, military grade, linked to every loyal soldier in the building. She knew the codes. He'd taught her. Drilled them into her like survival scripture. White Tiger Actual, she barked into it, voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. Code Obsidian. All units converge on Sky Lobby. Traders in formal wear, Russian accents. Neutralize Jaemin, repeat, neutralize. Static, then a chorus of affirmatives. Boots thundered in service corridors. Elevators locked down. Kang's remaining empire responded to her voice like it was his. Kang staggered beside her, blood soaking his white shirt crimson. He fired until his clip ran dry, then switched to knives, tattooed hands flashing silver death. Riley dragged him behind an overturned table, pressing her palm to the wound. "Hold on," she hissed. "You don't get to die on me now." His laugh was wet, delirious. "Bossy. I like it." Jaemin appeared through the smoke, face twisted with triumph, gun raised. "The storm ends tonight, brother." Kang surged up, empty-handed, ready to die standing. Riley didn't think. Just acted. She grabbed the fallen pistol from a dead guard, leveled it with both hands. The shot echoed like destiny. Jaemin dropped. Hole blooming red between eyes that had once smiled too thin. Silence crashed in, broken only by distant sirens and the whimper of survivors. Kang's men flooded the room, securing perimeters, dragging traders into zip ties. The foreign investors lay scattered like broken toys. Kang sank to his knees, blood pooling beneath him. Riley caught him before he fell, cradling his head in her lap. "You shot him," he rasped, wonder in his voice. "My Riley shot the devil. Had a good teacher." Tears cut tracks through the blood on her cheeks. He lifted a shaking hand, thumb brushing her lip. "You saved the Empire." "No," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "I saved you." Medics swarmed. Needles. Pressure. Shouted vitals. Kang fought the darkness, eyes locked on hers. "Don't leave me," he slurred as they lifted him onto the stretcher. "Never," she promised. "You're stuck with me, monster." His smile was faint, real, human. "Say it again." Riley leaned close, lips to his ear as the world blurred into sirens and motion. "Monster." The power balance had shifted forever. When the smoke cleared, Jaemin was dead. The Empire teetered but stood, held together by a woman who'd once been invisible. Kang lived. Wounded. Human. And hers. Completely, irrevocably hers. The medics loaded him into the helicopter on Hanul's rooftop pad, city lights swirling below like a galaxy drowning. Riley refused to let go of his hand until they pried her fingers away. "Family only," they barked. She met their eyes with the same steel she'd used to order executions minutes earlier. They backed down. She rode in the jump seat, stroking his hair while machines screamed his vitals. Kang drifted in and out, murmuring her name like a prayer and a curse. When they landed at a private clinic in the mountains south of Seoul, the world outside was already rewriting history. Lord Kang pronounced dead. White Tiger Syndicate in free fall. Stock markets jittery. Rival gangs carving territory like wolves on a fresh kill. He vanished from public life the way storms vanish, suddenly, completely, leaving only wreckage. They moved him at 3 a.m. to a safe house buried in the Taebaek Range. Traditional hanok walls reinforced with steel, surrounded by pine and silence. No roads in, only helicopter pads hidden under camouflage netting. Riley carried the 4-stand herself when the nurses hesitated. For 2 weeks she became his world. Changed bandages soaked with the blood of betrayal. Spooned rice porridge between lips that had once ordered deaths without blinking. Read stock reports and body counts aloud in the dark because he couldn't hold a tablet yet. Seoul outside grew restless. News feeds bled chaos, warehouse raids, lieutenants turning on each other, foreign syndicates sniffing at the vacuum. The underworld fracturing without its silent storm. One night the satellite dish caught a signal long enough for a late-night broadcast. Riley translated the anchor's polished Korean into English, voice soft against the crackle of the old television. Lord Kang, the last monster of Seoul, confirmed dead by multiple sources. An era of terror ends. The screen cut to file footage, Kang striding through Biko Club, eyes cold, tattoos flashing. The anchor's voice dripped satisfaction. Kang laughed from the futon, raw, bitter, the sound scraping his throat. Maybe they're right. His fingers found the fresh scar along his ribs, bullet track still angry and red. One less monster breathing. World should celebrate. Riley set the remote down carefully. Knelt beside him, cupping his face with hands that no longer trembled at the sight of his blood. No, she said softly. Monsters don't bleed for others. He stared at her, storm-dark eyes fractured by pain and something more dangerous, hope. Her kindness cut deeper than any knife. Deeper than Jaemin's betrayal, deeper than his father's ghost. She was sunlight on ink-black water, and he was terrified of the burn. He began to see her as something pure he could not keep. Intimacy grew in the quiet hours. Her washing his back in the cedar ofuro, steam curling around tattoos that told stories he'd never shared. Him tracing the curve of her spine while she slept, memorizing the map of the only territory he didn't want to conquer. Kisses that tasted like morphine and mercy. Bodies moving slow because fast still tore stitches, hers emotional, his literal. He whispered filth in Korean against her throat and apologies in English against her heart. She answered in both, teaching him that surrender wasn't weakness when it was chosen. On the 17th night, the safe house alarms ghosted silent, professional work. Motion sensors tripped by ghosts who knew his protocols. Kang was on his feet before the first explosion, gun in hand, old instincts overriding broken ribs. Riley shoved the emergency pistol into her waistband, the one he'd made her practice with until her aim rivaled his men. They came through the East Ridge, 20, maybe more. Masks. Military gear. Someone had sold the location for a price higher than loyalty. Kang fought like a man with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Blood reopened his shoulder wound, soaked the hanbok he'd thrown on. Riley covered the hallway, 2 shots, 2 bodies. Her teacher's lessons carved into muscle memory. When the last intruder fell, Kang stood in the wreckage of the living room, chest heaving, eyes wild. Pine smoke and gunpowder hung thick. The hanok burned behind them, ancestral wood-feeding flames that lit the snow crimson. He looked at her across the bodies, hair wild, face streaked with soot, pistol still smoking. His empire waited in the ashes of Seoul, leaderless and bleeding. He reclaimed it before dawn. Helicopters swooped in. Loyalists who'd been waiting for the signal. By sunrise, rival heads rolled on social media, literal and figurative. Territory lines redrawn in fire and fear. The white tiger roared again, louder because it had almost died. But Kang paid in currency heavier than blood. He sat on the chopper's cold floor as Seoul rose beneath them, staring at hands that had killed 3 men with a broken rib and no remorse. The fracture Riley had opened in him, the part that wanted to be more than his father's shadow, cracked wider under the weight of necessity. She slid beside him, threading fingers through his blood-crusted ones. "You had no choice," she whispered. His laugh was hollow. "That's the lie we tell ourselves, isn't it?" He turned to her, eyes ancient in the dawn light. "Every time I choose power over peace, I lose another piece of the man you think I could be." Riley pressed her forehead to his. "Then let me hold the pieces you have left." Kang closed his eyes, the storm finally quieting, not gone, but sheltered. In her. The city sprawled below, hungry and unforgiving. He reclaimed his empire. But the cost carved another scar, no bullet wound this time. Just the slow, aching realization that monsters could love. And that love might be the cruelest wound of all. The empire rebuilt faster than flesh. By the time Kang's scars faded to silver lines, Seoul bowed again. Deeper this time, terrified of the storm that had returned from the grave. Warehouses changed hands in silent auctions. Lieutenants who'd wavered found themselves floating in the Han. The White Tiger's roar echoed louder because it had tasted silence. But in the penthouse above the city, silence was the only thing Kang couldn't command. He moved through days like a ghost in his own kingdom. Meetings conducted via hologram because stitches still pulled, decisions signed in blood he no longer enjoyed spilling. Riley watched the fracture widen, the way he stared too long at the Jeju file, the way his hand trembled when he thought she wasn't looking. The man who'd once owned gravity now fought not to fall. The storm returned on a night that smelled like their beginning. Rain lashed the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning Seoul into a watercolor of neon and regret. Thunder rolled low, the same growl that had lived under Kang's skin the night she called him monster and sealed both their fates. He stood at the glass, shirt unbuttoned and soaked. He'd been on the balcony again, letting the downpour punish what bullets hadn't finished. Water traced the ridges of his tattoos, serpents weeping ink down his chest. Riley watched from the doorway, heart aching with the weight of everything unsaid. "You're going to catch your death," she said softly. Kang didn't turn. "Death already tried. Found me wanting." The words hung heavier than the rain. She crossed the room, bare feet silent on marble, until she stood behind him. Close enough to see the tremor in his shoulders, the way his fingers pressed white against the glass like he could push the city away. "I've seen you rebuild an empire in weeks," she said. "But you're letting yourself crumble." His laugh was bitter, fogging the window. "Empires are easy. Souls." He trailed off, jaw clenching. "Souls are messy." Riley reached out, fingers brushing the rain-cold skin of his back. He flinched, actually flinched, like her touch burned worse than bullets. "Talk to me." Kang turned then, eyes storm-dark and shattered. Water dripped from his lashes, traced the scar she'd stitched in the penthouse months ago. "What do you want me to say, Riley? That I'm tired? That every time I sign a death warrant I hear my father laughing? That I look at you and see the one pure thing in my life and know I'll ruin it?" His voice cracked on the last word, the silent storm finally breaking. "I've seen your power," she said, stepping closer until rain soaked her too. "Your cruelty. Your mercy. I've watched you choose life over vengeance when it would have been easier to burn it all. And now I'm demanding truth." He stared at her, chest heaving, the city's lights flickering across his face like judgment. "You think being feared makes you powerful," she whispered. Thunder punctuated her words. "But being seen makes you human." Kang's hands rose, slow, reverent, cupping her face like she was fragile and he was the danger. His thumbs brushed her cheeks, smearing rain and tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Then make me human, Riley." His voice was raw, stripped bare. "God help me, I don't know how anymore." She rose on her toes, pressing her forehead to his. "You already are." The words trembled between them. That's why it hurts. The kiss wasn't passion. Wasn't lust. It was defiance. Lips meeting soft and desperate, tasting rain and salt and every apology neither could voice. Kang's hands slid into her hair, anchoring like she was the only real thing in his collapsing world. Riley clutched his soaked shirt, pulling him closer until there was no space for ghosts between them. They stumbled back from the window, leaving wet footprints across marble. Two drowning people learning to breathe. He backed her against the wall, not caging but clinging. She framed his face, thumbs tracing the sharp lines that had once terrified her. "I love you," she said against his mouth. Simple. Devastating. The monster. The man. All of it. Kang broke. Not with screams or violence, but with the quiet shatter of a man who'd never been loved without conditions. His knees buckled. He slid down the wall, pulling her with him until they knelt in a puddle of rainwater and ruin. Forehead pressed to hers, shoulders shaking with sobs he'd never allowed before, not when his father died, not when Jae-min betrayed him, not when bullets tore through his flesh. Riley held him through it, fingers stroking his hair, whispering the only truth that mattered. "You're enough. You've always been enough." The storm raged outside, mirroring the one finally breaking free inside him. Kang clung to her like salvation, like damnation, like the only prayer he'd ever believed in. His empire could rebuild, had rebuilt, on fear and blood and unbreakable will. But his heart? His heart lay in pieces at her feet, terrified she'd walk away with the shards. Riley kissed his temple, tasting rain and redemption. "I'm not leaving," she promised. "Not ever." Kang looked up then, eyes red-rimmed but clearer than she'd ever seen them. "Even if I can't be the man you deserve?" "You already are." She smiled through tears. "You just forgot." He pulled her down into his lap, burying his face in her neck. The rain kept falling, washing Seoul clean for once. Inside, two broken people pieced each other together with whispers and touches and the kind of love that didn't flinch from darkness. For the first time, Kang let himself break completely. And in the breaking, found something whole. The storm passed eventually, leaving only the quiet drip of water and two heartbeats learning a new rhythm. His empire would call tomorrow, always did. But tonight, the silent storm was just a man. Held together by the woman who'd seen the monster and loved him anyway. The storm passed, but its echo lingered in every touch, every glance, every unspoken promise. Kang healed, body first, soul in fragments Riley collected one by one. He returned to the shadows fully, the silent storm reborn leaner, sharper, untouchable. The city whispered his resurrection like scripture, but no one saw the man who kissed her scars at 3 a.m. or learned to make her grandmother's jollof without burning the rice. They agreed on distance. Not separation, never that, but space for her to breathe air that didn't taste of gunpowder and regret. Riley went back to teaching. Back to chalk dust and teenage sarcasm and the small apartment that no longer felt like exile. Her life regained its rhythm, quiet, distant, haunted by storm-dark eyes and the ghost of rain on glass. Students asked why she smiled at thunder now. She never answered. Months slipped by like pages in a book she wasn't ready to finish. Kang's empire stabilized, cleaner on the surface, vicious beneath. He sent money she refused, flowers she kept, texts that made her laugh in grocery aisles. Never demands. Never timelines. Just proof he was still breathing, still hers. She taught them Audre Lorde on Tuesdays and Korean folktales on Thursdays, bridging worlds the way she'd once bridged his darkness and her light. Some nights she stood on her tiny balcony, watching Seoul's skyline gleam like a blade, wondering if he watched too. Then came the night the rain returned. Not a storm this time, just a steady Seoul drizzle that turned streetlights into watercolor halos. Riley marked essays under a single lamp, red pen moving slower than usual. The clock ticked past midnight. Her phone, the second one, the one tucked in her drawer like contraband, vibrated once. Unlisted number. Her heart recognized the rhythm before her fingers did. She answered on the third ring, voice steady despite the earthquake inside. Hello? Silence first, just breathing, familiar as her own pulse. Then that voice, low and amused, wrapping around her like smoke. Still calling me a monster? Riley's laugh was soft, surprised out of her. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes to better see him. Only when you deserve it. A pause, rain tapping the window like impatient fingers. Then say it again. The words came easy now. No fear. No challenge. Just truth, worn smooth by time and love. Monster. His exhale was almost a groan, relief, hunger, homecoming. God, I missed that. Where are you? She stood without thinking, moving to the window. Seoul glittered below, wet and waiting. Close enough to hear you breathe. Teasing turned serious. Far enough to keep you safe. Riley pressed her palm to the cool glass. I was never the one who needed saving. You still teaching those kids to dismantle empires with words? Someone has to. She smiled faintly. They ask about the necklace sometimes. The emerald one, hidden beneath her collar. I tell them it's from a ghost. Kang's laugh was quieter now, edged with something raw. Ghosts don't get to keep what they love, Riley. Bullshit. The word surprised them both. You kept me. Silence stretched, filled with everything they'd survived. She could almost feel him, leaning against some shadowed wall, city lights catching on ink and scars, eyes closed just to hear her better. I rebuilt it all, he said finally. Cleaner. Meaner. But every night I stand where we stood that first night, waiting for you to walk in and spill tea on my life again. Come get me then. The invitation slipped out before fear could catch it. Can't. His voice cracked, just once. Not yet. There's still blood on my hands that won't wash off. But soon. When the last debt's paid. When I'm more man than monster. Riley's throat tightened. You were always more man. That's why I stayed. Another pause. She heard him swallow. I love you, he said, simple and devastating. Every day I don't say it out loud, I say it in 100 other ways. The money you send back. The guards who watch your building but never bother you. The rain I pray hits your window when it hits mine. Tears slipped hot down her cheeks. I know. I feel it every time thunder rolls. Riley. I'm not going anywhere, she cut in fiercely. You vanish, you return, you bleed, you heal, I'm the constant. The one who sees you. Remember? His breathing hitched. How could I forget? Outside, the drizzle thickened, drumming against glass like a heartbeat. Tell me something true, she whispered. Kang's voice dropped to that register that lived under her skin. I still check the weather in Atlanta. Just to know if you'd need an umbrella if you ever came home. Riley laughed through tears. Come take me dancing in the rain instead. Deal. The smile in his voice was real, rare, hers. Same club. Same spilled tea. I'll wear the charcoal suit. I'll call you monster before the first song ends. Promise? Always. The line went quiet, but neither hung up. They breathed together across whatever distance he'd built between empires and ordinary life. Rain connected them, tapping in Seoul, probably tapping wherever he stood. Finally, softly, go to sleep, Riley. You first. His chuckle was warm. Stubborn. Learned from the best. Another beat. Then, reluctant, I have to go. I know. She pressed the phone closer. Kang. Yeah? I love you too. Monster and all. The line clicked dead. Riley stood at the window long after, watching rain trace paths down the glass like tears that weren't sad anymore. The city gleamed like a blade, sharp, beautiful, waiting. Her phone buzzed once more. A text. No words. Just a photo, the Biko Club bar, empty, one teacup placed exactly where she'd spilled months ago. Beneath it, a single black card with tomorrow's date. She smiled faintly, whispering into the silence. Monster. The rain answered, steady and sure. Cut to black. The sound of rain against glass. Some monsters, it seems, are made of love. And some love stories end not with periods, but with promises written in storms.